There was a disturbance in the town the next day. His father's forge was on the main street, and from where he worked he could see through the door, always open in the heat, directly out to where people walked past. At around midday, there was a small scurrying crowd, followed by a procession of figures in robes, followed by some more onlookers. His father left his anvil and stood at the doorway to watch. After a few minutes, he turned back to his work with a grunt, saying nothing. Jay did not ask him what he had seen. As far as possible, he never spoke to his father. And his own interest was only faint. Everything that happened on Anhual now seemed diminished and insignificant, and of no importance to him. He hardly even resented the forge, or his father's bent, glowering figure. As soon as dusk fell, and he could escape, he ran straight for the road that led up the hill to the temple, without going home first to wash or eat. If he could catch the Murai before classes began, he would not have to wait another 2 hours before hearing what else she had to say about her plan for him. He was hoping, too, that she would give him some money. He had a little, but he knew that it would be nowhere near enough to buy passage on a starship, let alone to masquerade as a priest. He sensed that there was something wrong as soon as he reached the gates. The doors to the temple were standing open, and outside knots of acolytes and students were huddled in groups like gawpers outside a house fire. An acute and sensitive fear stopped him going any nearer, and making himself conspicuous in his worker's clothes amongst all these robes. Instead, he hid behind the tall gatepost and watched. Murai Shiel emerged from the main doors, flanked either side by 4 priests in elaborate robes. Her demeanour, and theirs, told him that she was being led away, and the atmosphere of disarray amongst her students and the temple staff — he recognised the candle-lighters and the polishers — suggested confusion, sudden catastrophe. He shrank further back against the gatepost, desperate that she should not see him. Even if she did not betray him, he was afraid to catch her eye. When he looked round again, there were another 2 priests leading out someone else. Jay craned his head dangerously from his hiding place to see whose face was half concealed under the robe, and recognised Lien Duhal, one of the young novices serving his first few years of dedication to the temple. Duhal's head was bowed low, quite clearly in shame, and with a physical sensation of coldness, Jay understood that she had been with him, too. He crouched down lower and forced his mind to work. There was every possibility that they had looked for him in the temple, and not having found him there, they were now going to seek him at the forge or at his family's house. Even if they did not know about him now, Shiel might betray him when they questioned her. The decision was made for him now in this brutal way. He could not even risk going back home before fleeing, but he could not set out as he was. The crowds were outside watching the retreating prisoners and their guards. Jay walked quickly round the side gates and through the back entrance to the temple, which was never locked, unnoticed. As he had expected, the building was empty. If they were looking for him, they had finished their search in here. He slipped into the Murai's private robing chamber. Her scent still lingered in the atmosphere. He paused for a moment in the low candlelight, looking at a scene which told him that she had been surprised in here, with Duhal, presumably. On the bench was a neatly folded novice's robe. When he picked it up, some other garments and a bag tumbled out onto the floor. It was a strong fabric satchel, bearing the crest of a temple he did not recognise, finely worked in silver. Inside was a well-read copy of the Word of Lon with the same crest stamped on the inside cover, and a pouch full of silver coins. She had prepared this for him, he was sure of it. She had meant to give him this embroidered shift and silver wrought belt and acolyte's robes to enable him to impersonate a pilgrim from a good priest caste family. A curious transformation happened when he put them on. It seemed as he looked at himself in the mirror that the boy whose image he saw was not an impostor, but a reality separate from himself. He had created a new person. He had become something different in the very act of clothing himself. After all, whoever dressed in the clothes of another caste? What servant ever wore fabric like this? Who, looking at him, would begin to guess that he was not what he seemed? He practiced the shy, down-turned look of the novice priest, sneaking an upward glance from under his eyelids. It was the same power that the ability to speak untruths gave him, except that this was orders of magnitude more exciting. Emboldened, he swung the bag over his shoulder and stepped out into the main hall. He walked almost straight into one of the unfamiliar priests. Jay bowed, reacting on instinct. "Greetings. Excuse me. I wonder if you could tell me. I am looking for Murai Shiel." "You won't find her here." "Indeed. I thought this was her temple."
"It was, until today. She's been reassigned."
"Ah, I had a message for her from the Murai of my own temple. I'm on a pilgrimage to the capital for the Festival of Stars, and I was asked to stop off here. Where might I find her now?"
"I couldn't say."
Jay bowed his head again and tried to move past. He held his breath as the priest touched his arm with his staff, and turned back to face him respectfully.
"What is your name, novice?"
"Shannon," he said at random.
"From the temple of the Triluminary on Kalkoa, I see."
"Yes, sir."
"I've heard it's very beautiful."
"It is, sir, yes."
"You've come a long way, and you've a long way to go. I'm sorry you will have to take disappointment back to your Murai, but you may tell him that Shiel will not be able to receive messages for quite a while."
Jay nodded, bowed, and escaped, his heart thudding with excitement. With each step he put between himself and the temple, his sense of exultation mounted. There was no sign of Shiel or Liane Duhal on the road, and the crowd had dispersed entirely. He longed to break into a run, past the turning that would take him back down into the town, and straight ahead towards the sea, where the local docks were. But he made himself fall into a typical slow, drifting pace. He passed 2 lay members of the priest caste walking together up the hill, and exchanged bows with them without hesitation or recognition. It was going to be easy, he realised, because no one expected deception, and yet he had no difficulty practising it. He had not before this day recognised the extent of his gift and the immensity of its value. At the docks he gave his name as Janon of the Temple of the Triluminary, Kalkoa, and paid for his passage to Anhual's only starship dock in the Land of the West with 2 of his silver coins. He was shown respectfully to a window seat in the vessel by 2 uniformed servants who would not even look directly into his face. His fear of being recognised by someone from the town had vanished now. Everyone saw what they expected to see. And Jal, the apprentice metal worker, no longer existed, if he ever really had. He had been a bad dream to himself since descending from school into the forge. As the transport lifted from the ground with an odd, cushioned sensation of flight, he wondered very briefly about what would happen to Shiel. She had run her own risks in full knowledge of the probable consequences, and it wasn't as if she had confined her favours to him. A sharp sensation of unease spoiled his euphoria as the coastline receded, and he watched the familiar shore become like a line in a drawing. Despite his disgust at the thought of her with Duhal, the image stirred a craving that he knew he could never satisfy again. He glanced across at his immediate travelling companion, a sedate young woman of the sword-bearer caste. and tried to imagine what she looked like without all the clothes sword-bearers wore. There were so many elaborate layers of armour that peeling off each one must add to the excitement, and the body eventually uncovered must be all the softer and slighter and sweeter. The sword-bearer looked up from her pad, and their eyes met briefly. He dropped his lids in the correct fashion and inclined his head respectfully. No, never again.